So I will start with the current situation and then go back to the beginning of this memory war, where historical facts are used as a weapon. A month after the full-scale Russian invasion, Ukrainian media start to report about the purges of public and school libraries on Russian-occupied territories. The Ukrainian historical textbook and literature were withdrawn and burned, as well as academic and popular publication devoted to the history of Ukrainian resistance to the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. Nevertheless, I just need. Sorry, we have a technical problem. Okay. Nevertheless, selected books were sent to Moscow. On March 30, 2022, the Ministry of Education of Russian Federation arranged a press conference on the topic, the Ukrainian textbook as an element in the propaganda of hatred. The press conference venue became the central office of the Russian ruling party, United Russia. The Minister of Education of the Russian Federation, Sergei Kravtsov, declared that 50 Russian experts analyzed 300 Ukrainian textbooks published from 2013 to 2021 and claimed that, I quote, "We saw that there was a deliberate work to distort history and historical truth, provoking hatred of Russia," end of quote. Kravtsov also mentioned that anti-Russian textbooks were found in Crimea in 2014. Olga Kazakova, the head of the State Russian Duma Committee on Education, declared that, I quote, "We need to understand how to work further with the restoration of the cultural and educational space, which Russia and Ukraine should have in common. We are one people. We need to regain this right to a common cultural and educational space," end of quote. This is nothing new in these claims and declaration. Russians, no, it's like, I don't know what happened. Oh. There we go. There is nothing new in these claims and declaration. Russian officials just repeated the thesis of Putin article entitled "On the Historical Unity of Russian and Ukrainians." Released on July 12, 2021, the article aimed to provide the historical justification for full-scale Russian aggression in Ukraine. Its central argument was simple. Ukrainians have always constituted a part of the Russian people, and the Ukrainian state is an artificial entity. Relying on the old imperial narrative, Putin denies Ukrainian agency. Any Ukrainian historical figure that meant to separate Ukraine from Russia was treated like traitors who were inspired and supported by Russian enemies. And, well, like, no. During the press conference, Russian officials announced that Ukrainian textbook would be handed over to Ivan Yesin, the director of the historical park Russia My History. This institution would be responsible for storing and preparing interactive education program in the Russia My History parks all over the country. A small remark about the historical park Russia My History. The park was established in 2015. The initiative to create a park belonged to a Patriarch Council on Culture, one of the synodal institutions of the Moscow Patriarchate of the Russian Orthodox Church. Archimandrit Tikhon Sherkunov, also known as Putin's confessor, is the mastermind behind this idea. Even though Historical Park Russia My History is a separate institution affiliated with the Ministry of Culture of the Russian Federation, the Russian Orthodox Church continued to be the leading partner and de facto control of this chain institution. At the same time, Gazprom provides financial support. And I forgot to mention that Ivan Yesin, the head of the historical park, belonged to the Gazprom top management cohort. So back to claims made during the press conference about the Ukrainian textbook as an element of the propaganda of hatred. It was supposed that more than 200 books would be displayed as a part of the Освобождение or liberation exhibition arranged by the historical parks Russia My History. The exhibition aim was to reveal the extremist ideology of Ukrainian regime. However, the Liberation exhibition has not been arranged yet, maybe because the Putin plan to seize Kiev in 3 days collapsed. Anyway, the Ukrainian textbook were presented during another exhibition entitled Ukraine at the Crossroad of an Epoch that was held on November 24, 2021. The event was arranged as the 90th Church Public Exhibition Forum Orthodox Russia. One of the curators of this annual exhibition was Tikhon Shevkunov. The event's co-sponsor became the Minister of Culture of Russian Federation and the Russian Park and the Russia My History Historical Park. According to the official press release, the aim of this exhibition was following, I quote, "Along with the unique photographs, videos, and newsreels, the exhibition will feature maps, posters, and numerous archival documents. For reasons of objectivity, the interpretation of historical events from the point of view of Ukrainian state will be also presented." End of quote. This is another Russian propaganda. The further statement repeats the central message of Putin's article about the unity of Russian and Ukrainian people. I quote, "The war that has emerged in recent years between Russia and Ukraine, between part of what is essentially one historic and spiritual space, is a great shared misfortune, a tragedy." End of quote. This exhibition got a solid cover in Russian traditional and social media. So, as you can see, till the 2015, Russia has created a huge network for promoting their version of history that used as a tool to justify Russian war in Ukraine. And this is actually photos from this exhibition. And here you can see the stand with the Ukrainian history books. And I would like to show you the latest update from this battlefield of this history book witch hunt. Here you can see the decree of the so-called Ministry of Education of Lugansk People Republic, dated January 20, 2023, just a couple of weeks ago. The regulation contains a list of 365 books declared to be extremist and would have to be withdrawn from the libraries of the so-called Lugansk People Republic. Among them, there are 2 minds, and the book of well-known historians such as Stanislav Kulczycki, Sergei Plokhy, Paul Robert Magochi, Andreas Kapler, and even Amer Bartel. Actually. And here you can see the books of Professor Sergei Plokhy, which is actually declared to be extremist. And the last actually, Amer Bartel book, is the most interesting case. His book Erased Venice Traces of Jewish Galicia in present-day Ukraine was translated and published in Ukraine in 2010. This book was critical to Ukrainian state memory politics as that neglected the memory about Jewish cultural heritage in Ukraine. The author raised many difficult questions about the Holocaust, provoking an academic debate in Ukraine. And this book was not complimentary to Ukraine and did not praise the Ukrainian historical narratives. That makes me think that the people who made up this list were unfamiliar with the Ukrainian historiography and used the formal approach. They want to erase Ukrainian history and identity. Though most books on the list are historical, you can also find the books of famous Ukrainian writers Oksana Zabushko and Yuri Andrukhovich, as well as Russian-speaking Ukrainian writer Andrei Kurkov and Volodymyr Rafienko, who writes both in Russian and in Ukrainian. Russian proxies from the so-called LNR added to the list the memoirs of Ukrainian dissident Levko Lukyanenko and the book of Ukrainian political analyst of Jewish origin Vitaly Portnikov. All the books in this list have one trait in common. All of them deal with the Ukrainian history and identity. That fact is enough to declare them extremist. So, what is wrong with Ukrainian history textbook, and why is Russia so obsessed with history? When did Russia start to use and abuse history? To answer this question, we need to go back to 2005. The Orange Revolution became a Russian starting point for weaponizing historical narratives. During the presidential election of 2004, the head of Viktor Yanukovych's president campaign was a Russian political technologist, Gleb Pavlovsky. He standing behind the two Russian propagandistic narratives that became the frame for Russian propaganda for years. It was the first time that the narrative of Ukrainian fascists was used as a dark PR against pro-European candidate Viktor Yushchenko. Here you can see posters and outlets disseminated in the Donbas region, considered the electoral stronghold of Viktor Yanukovych party of region. Russian political technologists used posters depicting Yushchenko as Nazi leader Adolf Hitler. They also spread rumors that Yushchenko's father served as the German auxiliary police. However, it was not true, since Yushchenko's father fought against Nazis in the rank of Red Army and was a prisoner in German concentration camps such as Auschwitz. The second narrative presented Viktor Yushchenko as CIA agent, whose aim was to tear Ukraine away from Russia. This idea found further development in 2014 and would be extrapolated to all Ukrainians who supported the pro-European choice in their country. So here you can see the propaganda leaflet spread during the presidential election campaign in 2004. 10 Steps Towards People was the official name of the presidential program of Viktor Yushchenko. Technologies perverted and made entirely unrecognizable to stir up the fears of the Donbas region population. So here you can find the following ideas. Ukrainian fascists want to come to power and turn Ukraine into US puppet. Now this idea has transformed into the narrative of Russia fighting against NATO and the US. There is nothing new here. Russia always denied the Ukrainian agency. Putin has never believed that political development in Ukraine is a result of eternal process and insisted that Orange Revolution and Euromaidan were American plot. In 2005, Russia also started the campaign by disseminating Georgian ribbon, which became the new marker of Russian expansion and would be used during the war on Donbas. On June 29, 2007, Putin established the Ruski Mir Russian World Foundation. Its activities are financed by federal budget and private sponsors. Among the main tasks of the foundation are the following: the promotion of the Russian language, formation of a positive image of modern Russia and popularization of the Russian language and culture, support for the activities of Russian diasporas abroad, support for foreign Russian language media and expert communities focused on the achievement their foundation goals, preservation of Russian manuscript heritage, cooperation with the Russian Orthodox Church and other denominations in the promoting the Russian language and culture. From the very beginning, the head of the foundation has been Vyacheslav Nikonov, a man with a fascinating biography. He is a grandson of the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Soviet Union, Vyacheslav Molotov. In 1989, Nikonov became the youngest doctor of historical science in the USSR. Nikonov met the collapse of the Soviet Union as an assistant in the of the head of the USSR President Office. After the August 1999 coup, he worked as an assistant of the head of the KGB of the Soviet Union. After that, he continued his political career in post-Soviet Russia. Nikonov, the chairman of the State Duma Committee on Education and Science, holds the faculty of public administration position at Moscow State University. He is also the editor-in-chief of Russian Strategy magazine and chairman of the board of the National Committee for BRICS Studies. Nikonov is one of the authors of the Russian world ideology, according to which the configuration of Russian world is as follows. The core of the world is Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. The inner sphere is the post-Soviet space. The outer sphere is countries with a sizable Russian diaspora: Germany, Israel, the United States, Britain, Orthodox countries, Serbia, Cyprus, Romania, Montenegro, Bulgaria, countries where Russian diasporas are formed and there is an interest in Russian culture, such as Italy and Finland. According to the logic of its creators, the uniqueness of Russian world is that it's simultaneously synonymous with the meaning of empire and great power. Therefore, only Chinese civilization can compete with Russian world. The Russian world political value includes the sacredness of power, paternalism, and sovereignty. Spiritual matters are built around messianism in its classical Russian sense of Moscow is the third realm. Russian Wall Foundation was a response to the crisis of the Russian identity after the collapse of the Soviet Union. However, it evolved from the concept of soft power to the ideology of Russian neo-imperial expansion. Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, Kirill Gundyaev, simplifies the concept of Ruski Mir, Russian wall, to the three pillars: orthodoxy, Russian language and culture, common historical memory. Since the Russian Orthodox Church is considered the guardian of the Russian spirit, it controls or influences the structures responsible for promoting cultural identity, such as historical park, Russia, My History. The turning point in Russian historical propaganda became the Russo-Georgian War in 2008. The 5-day war that was presented in Russian media discourse as a peace enforcement operation revealed an unpleasant fact. Although the Russian invasion in Georgia became a military success, Russian authorities recognized that they had lost the informational war. They could not convince Western partners and justify this war. And here you can see how they actually switch their propaganda, because during the annexation of the Crimea, they use two different narratives. The first one was actually aimed to the EU and US and was, we are not here. And the second, for local population, was about Ukrainian government is fascist and anti-Russian, and also they told that Russia will improve the living standards of the local population. So in 2009, a year after the Russo-Georgian War, Russian experts analyzed the historical textbook of the Commonwealth of Independent States. They concluded that, except for Belarus and Armenia, these countries didn't perceive the role of the Russian Empire and the USSR as a positive in their history. According to the conclusion of Russian experts, if this trend continues for the next 20 years, the image of Russia as notorious empire will be decisively imprinted in the minds of the peoples of the former USSR. Naturally, that was unacceptable for Putin. Ukrainian historian Vladislav Grinevich rightfully believed that the indignation of the Russian leadership was quite natural for post-imperial space, where the collision of post-colonial and imperial discourses is inevitable. Moreover, reshaping the Soviet past among the Commonwealth of Independent States was natural, because a new future requires a new past. Russia is often characterized as a hybrid regime that co-opts and imitates certain democratic procedures while avoiding democracy's fundamental rotation of elected officials and governing parties. Since 2005, Russian media has been subjected to increasing political consolidation. However, a truly dramatic change in Russian media ecology was delayed until 2014-2015, the first phase of Russo-Ukrainian War. Today's Russia television market consists of 22 federal channels, divided between three holdings: state-owned Gazprom Media, National Media Group, and formerly a state-owned VGTRK, Old Russian State Television and Radio Company. The RT channel, former Russia Today, that since 2005 had broadcasted abroad, is also state-run. The most prominent role in broadcasting is played by Gazprom Media, which owns federal channels with the largest audience share. The Russian sociologist Anna Kachkaeva calls Russian TV pipeline television, which is less of metaphor than one would think. Gazprom Media's television cables are literally laid along Russian gas pipeline, an ostensible demonstration of the ultimate neoliberal fusion of media and industrial infrastructure. Due to a lack of political tools, today's Russian TV is one of the key elements that consolidate the country. According to a recent study, 85% of Russians rely on information from three basic federal channels: Первый, First, Россия-1, Russia 1, and NTV. During the latest decade, Russia TV has been producing an atmosphere of hatred. And since the annexation of Crimea and the first hostilities in Donbas, Russian television has incorporated a plethora of disinformation rooted in imitation. Most of their formats imitate history. Covering the situation in Ukraine, in 2014, Russian media used the frame of World War II which is extremely ideologized in contemporary Russian public discourse. It can be asserted that the Russian-supported campaign in Donbas was depicted as a Little Patriotic War, a repetition or re-enactment of the Great Patriotic War. Early on, Russian media reported on the threat from Ukrainian fascists, Ukro-fascists, or to Russians, as well as the struggle of militiamen opolchenцы against Kiev's junta. An us versus them narrative was developed with a good us whose grandfathers fought against the fascists and bad them, banderids, fascists, punishers, karate. Russian mainstream channel actively embrace reconstruction, emotional or dramatic performances, and the fake news. The production of emotion is a specific genre that allows ignore the common senses. The necessary level of emotion is attained by increasing airtime for news and political talk shows, as well as broadcasting such content in prime time. An architect of Putinism, Gleb Pavlovsky, said, I quote, "In Russia, there is neoprobe," from the Soviet agitprop, the machinery of stultifying television propaganda. It pumps up the population's loyalty by keeping the mass consciousness in a state of hysteria. Russia's people are being moved to the world of sinister political serial, and that is where they live. Launched by TV, fake messages are repeated and reinforced by social and digital media through transmedia storytelling. During 2014-2016, Russian propaganda had become so threatening that Ukrainian authorities had to ban broadcasting of 73 Russian-based TV channels, as well as some social and digital media on Ukrainian territory. Until the full-scale Russian invasion in 2022, this ban could be easily bypassed by ordinary users. In 2014, after the notorious fake story of a little boy crucified by Ukrainian soldiers, Russian state-controlled media disseminated another example of fake news. This time, Russian TV reported that the Ukrainian government promised each of its volunteer fighters a plot of Donbas land and 2 slaves from the local population. And here you can see Ukrainian colors that mock in Russian propaganda in Ukrainian segment of social media. This is actually the woman who told about this crucified boy. She pretended that like she saw it by her own eyes. At the same heated period, Russian primetime evening news featured celebration of the 70th anniversary of the expelling the Wehrmacht from Ukraine, which helped draw direct parallels between Nazis and modern Ukrainian soldiers, even in their appearance and their faces. The parallels play purely on emotions without any evidence of substantiation. On 24 August 2014, Ukraine's Independent Day in Donetsk, the so-called DNR militiamen, opolchenцы, organized a parade of Ukrainian prisoners of war. What makes it unique is the extreme imitative nature of this media event, which replicated in detail the parade of the defeated on July 17, 1944, when 57,000 German prisoners of war were forced to march along the central streets of Moscow. The Donetsk parade on the captured Ukrainian recreated the 1944 parade in every aspect. Water carts full of the prisoners of war washing the streets exactly as in Moscow 70 years earlier. This video was disseminated by news media. It reinforced the messages of Ukrainians equal Nazis by imitating the format association with the victory over the Nazis. In 2016, Russian media again used this video to downplay the Ukrainian military parade in Kyiv devoted to 21st anniversary of the independence of Ukraine. Russian media reminded their audience that DNR militiamen fight against scums which don't have any moral principles. This reinforced the stereotype of Ukrainian fascists utilized by Russian media. Another media event that imitated history was the Russian propagandist pseudo-documentary Project Ukraine, released in 2015. Shot by Andrei Medvedev, a former propagandist of PDRK and now a deputy of Moscow City Duma, This pseudo-documentary presents Ukraine as an artificial state created by Austrian general staff during World War I to weaken the Russian Empire. Ukraine's 1991 independence, as well as the 2014 Euromaidan, are depicted as a covert US operation against Russia. Medvedev includes interviews with historians, some with dubious background, to boost credibility and follow the genre's typical format. This imitative documentary unites in one linear narrative all fakes about the artificiality of Ukrainian history, language, and national genesis that previously were shared via Russian TV, web, and social media. Its release was also combined with a talk show of Vladimir Solovyov, a well-known Russian propagandist. So, imitating history has become an integral part of Russia's information war against Ukraine. Russian oppositional politician Vladimir Kara-Murza, in his statement, called this film xenophobic and one that has nothing in common with science and instead is politically motivated. At least 7 main speakers were involved in the production of Project Ukraine. They can be theoretically divided into 2 groups. The first one is presented by so-called experts who previously were involved in Russian propaganda and are famous for their biased assessment and interpretation of historical events. This pool of experts includes 3 historians and 1 political analyst. The first one is Bogdan Bespalko, chairman of the board of the all-Russian public organization called, with its very strange name, Federal, National, and Cultural Autonomy of Russia's Ukrainians, and a member of the Commission of Information of the State National Policy of the Russian Federation. The next one, Andrei Marchukov, Russian historian and columnist, famous for his Ukrainophobic position. Professional historian criticized his work as pseudo-scientific. Pavel Kuzenkov, Russian historian, who has close ties with Russian Orthodox Church, and actually Pavel Kuzenkov, one who is arranging exhibition for Russia My History Parks. And the last one is Anna Rezhny, a Polish historian and politician famous for her extremist conservative views. In May 2014, she signed an open letter to the Russian people and Putin, asking to protect the Slavic world and European Christianity from the spiritual aggression of the European Union. The second group includes 3 public figures who had to add credibility to this documentary due to their non-Russian origin. The first one was Ukrainian former diplomat Rostislav Ishchenko, who has close ties with pro-Russian Ukrainian politician Dmitry Tabachnik. In March 2014, he escaped to Russia, becoming a columnist for RIA News and a regular guest at the VGTRK talk show. During his interviews, Ishchenko emphasized the superiority of Russian culture over Ukrainian one. But the real surprise for the audience was the appearance of Krzysztof Zanussi, a famous Polish film director, scriptwriter, and producer in this film. His balanced comments made one assume that he was not aware of the actual plot of the film. The same can be said about Austrian scholar Alois Walden. These 2 persons' comments look as if they were taken out of context. The short airtime for these figures in the film supports this assumption. They were used to legitimize the credibility of all these fake historical narratives that imitated history. In 2019, a group of Ukrainian media experts selected over 150,000 posts in Vkontakte and 16,000 posts in Facebook from the period January 1, 2016 through April 1, 2019 to investigate posts containing the history-related keywords. Based on this analysis, they single out 6 fake historical narratives that Russia has disseminated in media. The first narrative, Ukraine is a failed shadow of Russia. In this narrative, Russian historical propaganda claims that Ukraine is an outskirt of Russia, and the word outskirt, Ukraina, allegedly gave the name to the country. The Russia is a successor of Rus, and that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church has no ground for independence. Second narrative, Ukraine is an artificial project of the West. In this narrative, Russian propaganda maintains that Ukraine is a fictional state that is a project of Western countries aimed at weakening Russia. They claim that Ukraine was invented by the Poles and the Austrians, and that Ukrainian language was created artificially, and that Ukraine took away the land that belonged to others. Narrative 3, Crimea, Donbas, and southeastern of Ukraine belong to Russia. In this narrative, Russian historical propaganda builds on its favorite statement that Crimea and Donbas allegedly always belonged to Russia, and the southeast of Ukraine is in fact Novorossiya. Narrative 4, USSR was a powerful empire and the Stalin was a hero. Another narrative of Russian propaganda glorifies the Soviet past and creates a new cult of Stalin. According to Russian statement, it was the USSR that created Ukraine, transformed it from backward country into progressive industrial state. Narrative 5, all Ukrainian nationalists were fascist. This is one of the most important statements of Russian historical propaganda. Basically, it claims that all nationalists in 1930s, 1940s were fascist, and that they were all Hitler's servants. It is furthermore maintained that the Glory to Ukraine slogan is borrowed translation of the Nazi salutation Heil Hitler. And the sixth narrative, Ukraine forgot about the victory over Nazism. An important element of Russian historical propaganda is an attempt to devalue Ukraine's role in the victory over Nazism. One of the messages claimed that the new Ukrainian memory politics ignored the great victory. Another narrative argues that it was Russian who liberated Europe from Nazis. All these narratives, except the last one, that emerged in 2015 after Ukraine adopted the decommunization law, were presented in Project Ukraine. I argue that this pseudo-documentary was the starting point of Russian imitation of Ukrainian history. In 2015, Medvedev also published a book entitled «Подлинная история русского и украинского народа», the true history of the Russian and Ukrainian people, that repeated the narrative suggested in the Project of Ukraine. And actually, here's the book, which were written by Ukrainian historians, and this book debunked all the narratives and all the messages of Russian propaganda. It's actually available for download, so it's like in English. Ukrainian scholar Tatiana Zhurzenko, in her essay in 2014, called this phenomenon of memory politics in the Russo-Ukrainian War the Russia's never-ending war against fascism. According to her conclusion, one of the intentions of Russia's new memory politics is the destruction of Ukrainian national identity. While Russian politicians speak about the brotherly Ukrainian people, they deny the legitimacy of an independent Ukrainian state and Ukrainians' right to decide their geopolitical futures themselves. In Russian geopolitical imagination, contemporary Ukrainian fascists are those who insist on separate Ukrainian identity and want their country to become a part of the West. Anti-fascism has thus become a central element of the new national idea and the motor of mass nationalist mobilization in today's Russia. This anti-fascism addresses both internal and external public. Russia's own population and Russophone in the near abroad on the one hand, and the West on the other. Depicting the two Western political elites in the post-Soviet state as fascist, Russia presents those states as a failed experiment in national building and admonishes the countries of the old Europe to reconsider the post-Cold War order in Eastern Europe. So this is essay was written in 1214, and as you can see, it's absolutely true. In 2016, Russia adopted a new doctrine of informational security. According to this doctrine, among the strategic goal and the main direction of informational security of Russia are the following: neutralization of information and psychological impact, including that one that aimed to undermine the historical foundation and patriotic traditions associated with the defense of the fatherland. Neutralization of the informational impact aimed to erode the traditional Russian spiritual and moral values, and development of national management system for the Russian segment of the internet. This doctrine replaced the outdated doctrine of 2000 that could not provide proper informational support of military invasion in Georgia. What is important here, the defensive memory politics became an official strategy of Russian informational security. As soon as Putin had come to power, he started to consolidate the media in state-controlled holdings. Russian TV became an integral part of Putin's authoritarian rule. Dramatic change happened during 2014-2016, when Russian media adopted fake as a genre and multimedia storytelling became a part of political strategy. Putin's regime changed Russian media ecology as well as weaponized the media and history by imitating to justify its neo-imperial ambitions. And at the end, I want to mention that last year, Andrei Medvedev, the author of the Project Ukraine, shot yet another pseudo-documentary called Mariupol. I will not repeat fake narrative presented in this film about the defense of Mariupol and Russian invasion in Ukraine. I just want to say that Russia continued to imitate history by creating narratives that deny or distort historical facts related to Russian military expansion and war crimes. They created the alternative version of history that disseminated in media and through the Russian historical network. History became not just an integral part of Russian neo-imperial war, but creates separate battlefield. So thank you very much for your attention.
All right, thank you very much for that very rich and detailed presentation. So we have about a half an hour for questions. So if you'd like to ask a question and you're in the Zoom audience, please type it into the chat and I will ask that here in the audience. But if we have questions in the room, so why don't we start with Leo and then.
Very informative presentation. Thank you so much. My question is, how much of this propaganda, which you emphasize is internal, how much of it is directed externally to, say, EU or even the United States or other places? How much of an effort is made there, other than RT, which we all know about?
I think it's like two different target audience. I mean, the inner audience in Russia and the Western audience. And of course, it's like they start this propaganda since 2005, because it's the date when the Russia Today was created. And I think since 2007, when they created the Ruski Mir Foundation, Russian Wall Foundation, it's like a starting point, because this was a kind of soft power, which were very aggressive. And in 2014, we have like 7 centers, affiliated centers with Russian Wall Foundation in Ukraine, and they were based in the eastern Ukraine, like Kramatorsk, like Donetsk, Gorlovka. So it's like target region in Ukraine.
Thank you for your presentation. Yeah, my question is the timeline. You cited 2005 as the beginning of this Russian propaganda campaign history, and you consider Ukraine the Baltic region evil. My question is, what about the Baltic states where this so-called, history or memory war was taking place? To what extent is also fed into what you call the need for information security, weaponization?
Well, I think this idea that, Ukrainian liberation movement of 1930s, 40s, as well as Lithuanian liberation movement, they have some connection with Nazi. And actually, Russia used this narrative to undermine the credibility of pro-Western elite in Baltic states and in Ukraine. And that is why they just create this direct ties between Yushchenko, and they just want to create this fake narrative that his father was like a part of auxiliary police. And Yushchenko, I mean, his historical policy which is main focus. It was Holodomor, but also the UPA problem. It's like gave for Russian propaganda this opportunity to undermine his credibility, like he wanted to justify a movement which has some close ties with Hitler. So they used this idea, but it's like this never-ending Russia's war against fascism, and it's true because we know that in 2015 it was a very big diplomatic scandal between Poland and Russia, when actually Russia. Russian President Putin make a statement that like. Poland is responsible for the beginning of World War II, and that they are like responsible for Holocaust, and they just cited Joseph Beck. It was like a citation, a quote from the context, and it was a very big diplomatic scandal. So I think that Russia used any opportunity to undermine the credibility and legitimacy of the pro-Western elite of Poland, Baltic states, and Ukraine. And I didn't mention in my presentation, but in 2020, there was another big article of Putin, and it was particularly devoted to the World War II and his interpretation of World War II. And I think it's a plan how to use and instrumentalize this narrative of World War II. But things change very dramatically, and in 2021, I think this article about the unity of Russia and Ukraine is like a program article of this war, which is creates the frame, a symbolic frame and historical frame for this war. And we also have another article. It was released in April 2, 2022. There was this article, Timofey Sergeytsev, and this article, What We Should Do with Ukraine. And actually, this is a plan of genocide, because he suggested to divide Ukrainian population to three groups. The one is Banderites, who need to be actually eliminated. The other group is the people who support Banderites, and they need to be punished. And the third group is like a potential group which could be incorporated in Russian Empire.
Yes.
Yes, you mentioned the Putin article in 2020 on the World War II. Actually, I read that at the time. My question at the time is, who wrote this article? It's impossible that he would look into this really minute details of history and write this. So you mentioned some historians who contributed to this whole project, but do you have any idea who were?
I'm not sure, but I think it must be somebody from Russian Academy of Science. That's my guess, but I couldn't prove it.
Let's call.
Hi, I'm Colin Cleary, an adjunct professor at GW. I'm just curious about, every morning I look at my Twitter feed and I see the nightly recitation of love for destruction and nuclear threats, and this notion, the quote of they're gonna die, but we'll go to heaven. In other words, it's almost like some death cult. So I wondered, how does how does this fall historically? Are they embracing a new kind of, in the propagandists on the Russian, nightly news? Is this sort of a death cult? Is there an antecedent here, or what's going on? This is an authorized line that they're putting out here on state media, and so are they just trying to resign the population to all holding hands and dying, or what?
I think it's like a kind. There is a kind of death cult in Russia, and it's connected with this idea of great victory. In 1950s, Stalin was actually declared to be the father of peoples, and it was like a god for Soviet people. And when he died, Khrushchev started his campaign to actually stop this cult of Stalin. But in 1960s, they create another cult, the cult of Great Victory. And this cult is actually very strong, and it was revived in modern Russia since 2005. It's like the 60th anniversary of the victory of World War II. And since then, it's like a central event in the Russian historical calendar. I don't know how to say. It's a main event, it's a main celebration. And in 2020, there is another very interesting event happened in Russia. They just finished the building of the temple of the, it's a main temple of the armed force of Russian Federation. And this temple, it's like a very syncretic one because it's combined both this symbolism of World War II and the Great Victory, as well as Orthodox things. And there are a lot of ornaments and fresks which use, for example, in this particular temple, there is a fresk which is called the Parade of Victory, and it's like historical picture of victory, and this celebration is 1945. And there are another fresk which is called the Reunion with Crimea, something like that. And these fresks are part of this particular temple. So it's like a, yeah, it's like a cult. It's like a cult.
But what about this love for nuclear war? Love for, you know, they seem to want it. I mean, I know that, you know, they're constantly talking about it.
I don't believe that they really ready to use a nuclear weapon. I think it's like blackmail. But still, when we talk about memory politic and identity, we see this idea of I mean that they are very interested in their war tradition. They create this universal symbol of Russian expansion, Georgian ribbon, which actually connect both Soviet period and Russian imperial period. And this idea to sacrifice, it's like, you know, that in Russia, World War II is like Great Patriotic War, and it's like a sacred war. So the war is like requires sacrifice. So I think this is the idea how to motivate people because this, I believe that for many Russians, this war in Ukraine is not so obvious why they should die in Ukraine. And it's like another way to motivate people.
So we have one more question, and then we have several from online too, but we'll do one.
Okay. You mentioned the fact that the line that Poland was responsible for World War II. I'm wondering to what extent has anybody in the West taking this seriously, and if not, what's the purpose of this notion? Now, that's the first part of the question, because this idea that Poland started World War II clashes directly with some very research findings by historian Sean McMeekin. I don't know if you read his latest book. It's called Stalin's War. It's an 850-page compendium, massively research documented when he still had access to Moscow. And his argument is that both Hitler and Stalin were responsible, equally responsible. Maybe Stalin may be even more responsible for World War II. And just this follows on his previous book, which is fascinating, absolutely fascinating. He blames Russia for starting the First World War. The book is called Russian Origins of World War I. Another brilliant read. Are you familiar with these works?
No, I didn't, but I will read it because it's really interesting. Well, as for the Poles, they actually took this accusation very seriously. I didn't think that maybe other politicians, I mean, like in Brussels or other countries, took it seriously as well. But For Poles, it's a very big matter because, for example, they struggle a lot with this mentioning of Polish concentration camps. It's like German concentration camps on Polish territory, and for them, these things are really matter. And as far as I understand, Polish-Israeli relationship is very important for Poles. So such accusation is like a very big scandal. So they took it seriously. It was a very big diplomatic scandal in 2019. It was like December 2019 when this situation occurred.
So we'll get to your two questions in a second. Let me ask one question from the Zoom audience, which is, why did Putin choose to use the neo-Nazi narrative for Ukraine when he could have stuck with the longer-term narrative, such as the conspiracy that NATO is out to destroy Russia? The neo-Nazi one just appears delusional to the West, while at least the anger over possible NATO expansion makes some sort of sense, even if one does not agree.
No, well, I think that the Putin is deeply Soviet people. Deeply Soviet. I think for him, this narrative is very familiar because, you know, in Soviet Union, it was like black and white narrative of World War II with good Russian, Soviet army soldiers, which mostly were called Russian, not Soviet. And so good us and bad them. And like this logic is very convenient for propaganda because it's black and white. And he used it maybe like those one which would find response on the post-Soviet space because it's like people are familiar with this narrative. It's just easy to mark somebody as Nazi to understand that this is a bad guy. So he uses it just because it's convenient. This logic is simple. This logic is familiar to the people in Ukraine and it resonates well. It's easy.
Okay, makes sense. So yes.
Yeah, this is a quick question. So I'm sure you've heard of the Gorskaya Madonna story, right? And my question is, do you also believe that that's a hoax? And if you believe that's a hoax, then how can you prove that it is?
Well, I'm not sure because it's not my part of expertise. I just don't want to intervene in the field, which is not mine, because
it's a really loud story. This was right as the bombardments of the Donetsk and Luhansk started in 2014. It's an extremely famous story. Obviously, in that part of the world, Russia, Ukraine here is not really that well known, as are the DNR and LNR, of course. But you know, it was there were pictures. There was stories from the witnesses that, you know, there were these rockets that were landing on people. 20 people died on that one day. And why that story is real loud is because there was a mother and her child. And so they died on the spot, you know, and she was holding her child in her arms. And so I just can't really quite see what objections there are as to what really happened there, because it seems really clear that it was the actual Ukrainian authorities that landed those rockets, but I'm really open to hearing the objections to that.
Well, actually, this kind of narrative is not new because the same narrative I heard in the 1990s when actually people were talking about the war in Chechnya, and it was like the same narrative. They also create like this idea of something bad happened. I mean that bad people make something bad, and it's like you know, in Russia, I think in Russia they need to create this pantheon of new sacred people, and it's extremely important for Russian Orthodox Church, and they use this narrative during First and Second Chechen War, and I think they just try to create another narrative now because reinforce this propaganda and this narrative, because you know, it's about, I think it's about this magic consciousness, because when we talk about the tradition, it's not about fact, it's about emotions, it's about some imagination. So I think so.
I completely agree. It's just the thing that it seems to be a fact you know, so narratives are everywhere from both sides. You have narratives from the US, Ukraine, Russia, but if that's actually what happened, then shouldn't we just, you know, just believe the facts? There's a disinformation, of course, from both sides, but, you know, I just can't, I have, well, there's disinformation from every side is trying to.
Student here, who are you?
No, I'm not a student. I'm not affiliated with any country. So I'm just.
How come?
Are you from the
Any
Russian?
country?
Are you
Any
from-
country that we're discussing
Are you from the
here.
Russian embassy?
I'm really not. No, I'm actually from Moldova, which is completely neutral in this case. I'm not.
Would you be Slovenia?
No,
Really
I'm
neutral?
actually.
Well,
So we'll
Yeah.
go to the next question. Yaroslav, I think you had a
Oh, I
question.
just want to clarify. To my mind, this historical war, let us say, is also part of Russian nation building project. Are you agree with this? That this is not only anti-Ukrainian propaganda, which is oriented also to the West, but also it is very closely oriented to this project, how to create a new Russian nation, because this is not.
yeah, globally, yes. Actually, this is a kind of problem because in 1990s, it was like a vacuum of this national identity, and it was like a challenge for all post-Soviet republics. Ukraine, maybe only Baltic states had like narrative and this identity, but for the other former Soviet republic like Ukraine, like Belarus, like Kazakhstan, it was a real challenge, and for Russia too. And since Russia couldn't create national states, they just revive the empire, and they go back to the idea of the empire. So if we look at this situation globally, yes, because the core idea of Russian empire is like Kiev and Kiev and Rus legacy. And for them, it's really important to withhold this territory because it's crucial for Russia to stay the empire. I mean, in symbolic way, because Kiev, like a mother of Russian state, Russian cities, Russian towns, like that. So it's like a symbol. It's a very big symbolic meaning. And the other thing, this is the idea of Christianity, because it's also starts in Kiev. And this idea of Orthodox Church, it's like Russian Orthodox Church. It also starts from Kiev. So since Russia couldn't create national state, they just revived this idea of empire, and this like provide a certain logic, and this is logic of expansion. So in that way, you're right.
So in this sense, they are in fact victims of the previous narratives from the 19th century, when they created narrative of Great Russia, who evolved from Kiev Rus and so on and so forth. It's like a backlash.
Yeah, I completely agree.
So yes, sir.
Just a very general question. Any comments on the increasing Russian information space as we see 210,000 websites closed down since in the last year by the Russian government, prosecution of journalists, arrest of journalists, and what that portends for the Russian future. And again, how does that impact these Russian narratives? As the actual space for debate and conversation in Russia gets smaller and smaller.
Well, I think this is a very big challenge for Russian journalists and Russian independent media, and for Russian liberals who now just like living abroad, and how to deal with Russian society, which actually supports this war, like 70 or 80% people support this war in Ukraine, support Putin. And this is a really big challenge. But it's like not Ukrainian challenge, it's more challenge for the Russian people. We aware, I mean, that Ukrainian authorities are aware that we need some strategy how to live with a very aggressive neighbor, how to deal with a very aggressive neighbor. But if we talk about some idea of like denazification, like in Germany, it was possible because it was unconditional defeat. I mean, that Germans signed this unconditional act of capitulation. And when we talk about the Russia, which is nuclear power, it's completely different story. And for Ukraine, it's crucial to restore its integrity and to create new strategy how to deal and how to live with such a dangerous neighbor. But I think this is our agenda. And then when we talk about Russia and how to deal with Russia, well, you know that the idea of Russian Empire in 18th century, it was actually created by Ukrainian Feofan Prokopovich, who actually created this myth of Russia as empire for Peter I. And I think that this time Russia needs to solve this identity crisis by themselves. They need to create national state. And I think that Boris Yeltsin, he's trying to create this national state in 1990s, and he even invented this idea, not Ruski, but Россияnin, which is meant political citizen, political citizenship, political identity. But still this project, yeah, well, it's like failed. So it's a big problem, and it failed in 1999 because I think this movie, which is called Brat 2, is like the turning point, because it's showed that Russian society, they just liked this movie very much, and Danilo Bagro, who's main character of this movie, he became like a national hero. So it's like a turning point from the cultural perspective.
So we have a very lively discussion here in the Zoom audience, and I can't repeat everything that's here, but I wanted to ask one question that's very clear. So the question is, am I right to understand that you present Yanukovych's and the Party of Regions historical views propaganda as part of Russian historical policy and not a variant of the Ukrainian policy?
In 2004, yes, Yanukovych was pro-Russian candidate in the presidential election, and he actually, his presidential campaign was governed by Gleb Pavlovsky, who is a Russian political technologist. And we know what happened in 2014, when actually Putin just bribed Yanukovych. He suggested him $15 billion to surrender Ukraine. So I think it's pretty clear what's happened. So yeah, it was a technical candidate, which according to Putin's plan, he had to just surrender Ukraine to Russia. And as far as we know that in February 2022, they prepare kind of transitional government, which I think Yanukovych was like a president. So it's like they continue to use Yanukovych like legitimized president of Ukraine. So they try to restore Yanukovych as a president. So it's obvious.
Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time. Okay, well, first run out of time. So please join me in thanking our speaker for a wonderful presentation. And I'm sure you'd be happy to sit down and answer a few questions from the audience members. But thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.